1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 26 to 40. What then, brothers? When you come together, each one as a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. Let all things be done for building up. If any speak in a tongue, let there be only 2 or at most 3, and each in turn, and let someone interpret. But if there is no one to interpret, let each of them keep silent in church and speak to himself and to God. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak, and let the others weigh what is said. If a revelation is made to another sitting there, let the first be silent. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that all may learn and all be encouraged. And the spirits of prophets are subject to prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. As in all the churches of the saints, the woman should keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but should be in submission, as the law also says. If there is anything they desire to learn, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for a woman to speak in church. Or was it from you that the word of God came? Or are you the only ones it has reached? If anyone thinks that he is a prophet or spiritual, he should acknowledge that the things I am writing to you are a command of the Lord. If anyone does not recognize this, he is not recognized. So, my brothers, earnestly desire to prophesy, and do not forbid speaking in tongues. But all things should be done decently and in order. In today's passage, Paul summarizes his argument of the gifts of the Spirit and public worship, and how Christians ought to act. Whether it is the gift of tongues or the interpretation of tongues, whether it is the gift of prophecy, the gifts are to be used to build up the church while worshiping, and to be used in a decent and orderly manner. Along with this, Paul exhorts the women in the church, specifically the wives, to not speak up during the public worship time. Paul's exhortation is specifically speaking about public worship, and this worship was accessible not only to the believers but to the unbelievers as well. In Roman society, married women wore veils in public to not represent themselves as much, and Paul's giving his argument along with this, that married women be modest and not speak up in public worship. This was so that when unbelievers come to partake in public worship, they may see the worship done in order and decency and come to open their hearts toward God. Paul was always gospel-centered. In whatever he did, Paul always wanted to share the gospel. That's why Paul went as far as to lay down his ethnic pride for the sake of the gospel. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19 to 23 says, For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became as a Jew, in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. As we meditate on today's passage, I pray that for the sake of the gospel, we patiently love everyone that God sends our way and lay down our rights for the sake of their souls.